Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of What's New in Prisma. My name is Nicholas Berg and I'm a developer advocate at Prisma, and I'm here with my colleague Alex, also a developer advocate at Prisma. Alex, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Pretty excited for the stream and what we're going to discuss today. How are you doing?
I'm also doing great. I am refreshed. Hopefully you can see that a little bit. I was on vacation for the entire month of January, and I went to Costa Rica and I had an amazing time there. So that's great. I'm back, and a lot of exciting things have happened while I was gone, by the way. We've launched a new product called Prisma Accelerate. And you and Tassin, you have talked about it on the last stream together with one of our engineers, right?
Yes, we did. It was 2 weeks ago, I believe. Yeah, it was pretty
Yeah, exactly. The last
exciting.
stream was 2 weeks ago, right? We
Yes.
shifted this one a little bit.
Yeah.
And back then we just had announced it actually, that we are going to start the private early access program for Prisma Accelerate soon. And in fact,
Yeah.
this week we have opened it up, and the first people who have signed up for this private program have started using Accelerate. And now, for those of you who have no idea what Accelerate actually is, very briefly, it is a globally distributed cache for your database. So it's a cache that caches the data from your database in over 280 locations worldwide. And it's particularly well suited for serverless and edge applications that typically are also distributed across various regions across the globe. So that's a pretty exciting product, I think, and I'm looking forward to hear feedback of the people who started using it. At the end of today's stream, we will just quickly talk about it, walk through some resources, not really a deep dive. For people who are interested in that, they can go back to the previous stream from 2 weeks ago, 4.9.0. Alex, I think this week you had your first ever podcast appearance. Is that right?
That's correct. On Tuesday, I had a podcast recording with LogRocket for PodRocket. It's not out yet, but it should be out in about a week and a half. Well, yes. And we talked about Prisma, Prisma Migrate specifically, because that's one topic that I really like to nerd about, and migrations. And also talked about the Edge and Accelerate, which we just launched as well. So looking forward to seeing it live. It was a pretty kind of nerve-wracking experience, in the sense that when you're doing something for the first time, there's always that nervous feeling, but I'm glad I got over it. Yeah.
I totally get this. I had exactly the same when I was the guest on my first podcast a couple of years ago. But over time, you start to develop a little bit of a routine, and I think also these live streams also help a little bit with that. That at least you're used to sitting in front of a microphone.
Exactly, they helped a lot. That's for sure.
All right, let's quickly tell people what we have in store for today's stream, actually, because it's not going to be all this irrelevant banter for 1 hour now. We actually have something more substantial that we want to talk to people about. So first of all, as usual, we are going to talk about the release that happened this week. It's version 4.10. Like nothing too fancy in there, but we'll still just walk over the release notes as we usually do. And then we have two guests on the stream that I'm personally really excited about. The first one is Justin. And Justin built a really nice tool that I saw on Twitter. It's an AI-based seeding tool that you can use to seed data in your database. And he's going to show us a little bit how this project works and what it does. And then we also have Nils from Sidebase. And Sidebase is a full-stack development framework based on Vue and Nuxt. So I'm also looking forward to chat with Nils a little bit there. And that's particularly exciting because they are using Prisma as the default ORM in Sidebase as well. And it took a while until they got there, actually. Before that, they had tried Prisma at one point already. They ditched it. They went with Type ORM and now recently migrated back from Type ORM to Prisma. So I'm looking forward to learn a little bit more about the journey there. And yeah, that's going to be great. But Alex, as it's good tradition on the show, let's go ahead and talk about release notes. All right. Can you see my screen, Alex?
Not yet.
Not yet.
I cannot.
And let there it is,
now
right?
I can. Yes.
Okay. All right. So now we're good. The screen is visible, and we have the release notes of version 4.10 open right here. So this was just...
Sorry for interrupting, but could you bump up the zoom just a little bit?
Yes, of course. That better?
Yes, a good rule of thumb that my mentor always tells me is that just bump it all the way up, and if you think you've zoomed in enough, just bump it up again. Yeah.
Fair enough. All right. This release was, again, more focused on stabilizing some existing functionality and making Prisma a bit more robust. So we improved the introspection support for Postgres views. So views, anyways, is a new feature that we've introduced in the last release in 4.9. I think it's currently still running in preview. And now you're also able to get the views inside your Prisma schema when you run Prisma DB pull, Prisma's introspection command. So hopefully for those of you who are using views and who need to use introspection every once in a while, this makes your life a lot easier. And then there also were some more issues with introspection, in particular with features that you might use in your database that cannot be represented inside of the Prisma schema. And in that situation, the entire Prisma schema and its synchronization with the database sometimes feel like rather brittle. Sometimes when you reintrospect, things would get overridden, or relevant information that you might have added before was removed from the schema file again. So now these workflows, when you introspect a database that uses functionality that's not natively supported by Prisma, should be a little bit smoother overall. And then in an effort to reduce the engine sizes of Prisma that we've already started a couple of weeks ago, and where we already successfully decreased the size of the engines, also the query engine, I think that's the most relevant for people, by about 50%. That was already in a previous release, and in this release we further reduced the size, especially of the Prisma CLI, by removing the introspection and formatter engines and consolidating all of this a little bit. So the Prisma CLI is now quite a bit more lightweight than it used to before, and I think that's a great improvement, especially for people who are running Prisma in like CI/CD workflows where they're using the Prisma CLI in kind of an automated way. So these workflows should be a little bit more slick now as well.
By the way, one thing to highlight in the previous issue for the unsupported features, our product and engineering team created a GitHub issue compiling all the features that the database supports that the Prisma schema doesn't support. That if you'd like to provide input.
Ouch.
That was unexpected.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah. So yeah, we would appreciate your feedback on that as well. And in particular for this release, we actually added introspection support for partitions in the database. So that means when you usually add a partition a table in your database, it would be breaking down one table into multiple mini small chunks. And when you introspect it, the Prisma would introspect and add every individual chunk as a separate model. So we're kind of able to consolidate that into a single model. So you can run Prisma DB pull to introspect that. And then if you want to create a migration, you'd have to go a slightly painful route where you create a draft migration and then add the SQL to actually partition the tables.
I see. So like Prisma wasn't quite working correctly with partition tables before because every chunk would end up being its own model, but
yes,
that's now fixed, and we now have one model that actually reflects the actual table, the partition table.
Exactly.
Great. Well, with that, I think we are already at the end of our discussion of the release notes. I will stop sharing my screen and we can pull up our first guest, Justin. Hey, Justin.
Hey, I'm happy to be on the show.
Yeah, welcome. It's really great to have you here. First of all, where are you dialing in from?
Oh yeah, I'm dialing in from Dallas, Texas.
All right.
Yeah, just recently graduated college, so I'm back at home for now.
Nice. So it's the morning time for you here in Berlin, where we're both located, Alex and I. It's already the late afternoon now. And you have come across on our radar because you tweeted about a tool that you built, and that's using AI, artificial intelligence, to seed a database. And that sounds really exciting. And we certainly want to learn more about this on the stream today. But maybe before we dive into that, Justin, why don't you give us just a quick overview of who you are and what your background is?
Yeah, definitely. So my name's Justin. I'm a recent computer science graduate from Georgia Tech. I just graduated this December. Right now, I'm living at home, and I will be starting my new grad job as a site reliability engineer at Atlassian this summer. And over the past 2 months, I would say, ever since ChatGPT came out, I've become really interested in the whole AI space, the whole using GPT in software applications, which led me to start working on an open source project called Promptable.js. So Promptable is really being spearheaded by another software engineer, Colin, and he's really building out the core of the library, and I'm helping out with some of the examples and documentation and such. So yeah, that's just some background.
Nice. Let's maybe approach the seeding topic then through that angle first. I'm curious, what is Promptable.js exactly? Like, what does it do? How would a JavaScript developer use it?
Yeah, so Promptable.js is really a JavaScript library that enables you to use these large language models like GPT-3 much more easily. So there are already some Python equivalents to this library, but there aren't any currently available for people using JavaScript or TypeScript. So some of the core features include, for example, chaining. So chaining is when you have multiple calls to GPT-3 and you chain them together, like one output to the next input, and so on. So this allows you to build more robust applications. Another, I guess, example would be indexing, which is where you can put in a bunch of text and kind of build a knowledge base off of that you can later query using a GPT-3.
I see. So it basically enables JavaScript developers to fairly conveniently build AI functionality into their own applications based on existing language models that otherwise are hard to access from JavaScript. So if I wanted to do this without Promptable, then there still would be a way, but I would need to use these complicated interfaces of the language model itself somehow.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. Very cool. That sounds like an awesome project. Okay, before we talk about how you went from Promptable to building this seeding tool, I'm just curious. With all the guests we have on the show, I'm curious, kind of what's their Prisma story? How have they first heard of Prisma? Did you build anything with it before? When did you hear of us first? So just curious what your Prisma story is.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great question. So I'm actually fairly new to Prisma. I only learned about it last month, and I'm also fairly new to the whole TypeScript ecosystem too. I also only learned about it last month. Basically, when GPT came out, I knew that I needed to learn web dev, and I needed to learn it quickly. So I looked up this basically this stack called the T3 stack, which includes a lot of great tools like TypeScript, TRPC, and of course Prisma, and that enabled me to build some small side projects using GPT-3. And so I really like Prisma because it just makes it super quick and super type safe to build out your application and interface with your database. And I built some small side projects with that too.
What were some of the programming languages that you had been exposed to before, or that you used before you dove into the TypeScript world?
Yeah, so before that, I was really a lot more experienced with like data analytics and I guess like infrastructure, like cloud infrastructure. So I would do a lot of like Python data visualizations for my previous internships. I worked at like Texas Instruments, for example, and I made some like data visualization boards for like their semiconductor fabs. Later, after that, I did some cloud work, mainly in Golang for Atlassian. I worked on the Bitbucket SRE team, and I built some like basically some automation tools for their team.
I see. Well, I feel sorry for you that you're now part of the JavaScript ecosystem that's eating everything, but that's just how it goes for all of us. All right, but it's great to hear that you've been using the T3 stack. I think it's getting really popular at the moment, and it's very easy to get started. It has this end-to-end type safety with TRPC. It's definitely a great stack that we are also frequently recommending to people. So nice to hear that also kind of web development newcomers kind of like find it, and it's approachable enough for them to build something quickly.
Yep, definitely.
All right, then how did you get the idea to build this seeding tool based on AI? And you call it GPT-Seed, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, so the idea actually came from Colin, the main core, I guess, engineer for Promptable. And we were really just thinking about what are some cool examples that we can do to demonstrate, I guess, like the powers of Promptable.js. And one of the ideas he threw at me was like just seeding for databases. And I thought that was really cool. So I started working on that, kind of hacked it together over a night, and like posted it on Twitter the next day.
Really, really cool idea. And I think that this like seeding of databases is really, I mean, like it's one of the things that a lot of people want, and basically you don't need much else than a Prisma schema in order for some seeding tool to be able to fill the data in your database, right? But all the attempts that I've seen in the past, I think some have been using Faker.js. I haven't seen like this or the seeding solution for databases in combination with Prisma. So I really think that this AI-based approach maybe has some potential. And if it works out, then it'll be the default that we'll just recommend to our community in the future.
Yeah, definitely. I'm super excited about it. It's really cool how like instead of having to write all the example C data manually, you could just pretty much make one call and do it that way.
Exactly. Do you maybe want to give us a little bit of a demo and show how it works and talk a little bit about the implementation of it? I think that would be
sure.
Really nice.
All right, I'll share my screen. All right, can y'all see it?
Yes. Sorry, Alex.
Okay.
You're the...
All good. Adding into the stream. Yeah.
Yes.
All right, cool. All right, so I'm just going to start off by showing the Prisma Studio page. It's currently just a small table. It's empty right now. There's no data. And I'm going to go over to, I guess, the seed file. Or actually, just to give a little bit of context, the way you seed your database in Prisma, it's really straightforward. You just follow this tutorial. There's just a few config files you change, and then you add a c.ts file to your Prisma directory. And that basically runs whenever you want to seed your database. So yeah, back to VS Code. So this is what the entire seed.ts file is. It's basically just importing GPT-Seed, getting like your environment variables for your OpenAI key, API key, and then just running GPT-Seed by passing in your key. So there's no really yeah. Oh, go ahead.
That key, that's probably then also used under the hood by Promptable.js, and that's just needed in order to like to authenticate yourself against the language model that you're using in this case. Okay.
Yep.
And where do you get that key from typically?
So you would just go to I believe it's platform.openai.com, and you can like register for your own API key here.
I see. And then like they spit it out and you can use it in your applications.
Exactly.
Perfect.
So this is the entire file, and we're just going to run it now. So we're just going to run the seed command. It'll take a little while to query all of the large language model calls, and then we'll get some data back out of it.
What does the like Prisma schema look like? What's the model? It's a user with a name and their favorite food. All right.
Favorite food. Yep. So a small one just to show for the demo. And if we go back to Prisma Studio, refresh to see what our schema outputs, it now outputs like relevant data based off of the field name for each column. So you can see like pizza, hamburgers, sushi, stuff like that.
Okay, so it looks at the field names and understands kind of the concept or the thing that needs to be populated there in terms of data, and then just generates random data for the fields, for the new records.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, so I guess, go ahead.
It's just a quick question. I can see that it's seeded about 5 records. Is there a way you can specify the number of records to be seeded into the database? Say, I don't know, 100 or 100,000, perhaps. Yeah.
There is a way. We haven't currently implemented it yet, but we definitely could do that in the future. Right now, it's kind of like this is based off of like an old version of Promptable.js, so I haven't added much to it yet. But once we get like the full release of Promptable, I'm gonna add a lot more of the features to make it like a usable product. Sorry.
What does the implementation of this GPT-Seed function actually looks like? I'm curious. Like one function you're calling the seed.ts file. Yes, exactly. Maybe walk us through a little bit through the code there, and see if we can understand and follow what's going on.
Yeah, definitely. So the seed.ts file calls or imports GPT-Seed from this file, and it's really just a pretty short file. All it does is it does some initialization for finding your schema file, schema.prisma file. It creates a prompt, and a prompt is basically what you input into your large language model, in this case, GPT-3. So this is our prompt, and it's basically saying, create a list of 5 examples of the following data and type. And then it gives some brief examples. So these are examples of a string type that has the data field of name. This is birthday for date time. And this is basically teaching it what to do. And this is where the actual like output gets out. So this is basically a large template string where these are the inputs to the template string, field name and field type. And after that, it'll output something, and we'll parse that output to put back into our schema or into our database.
All right, now the name Promptable.js also makes a lot of sense because prompts are the thing that you put into the AI. I actually wasn't aware that that's the term that you use, but that's probably the same when you use like ChatGPT. You also call it a prompt when you like share or like provide an instruction to it.
Yeah, exactly.
I see. And it's like really interesting because I think that with the help of AI now, it's the skill I think that people will need to develop is how to formulate the prompt properly so that the AI does what you want, right? So that's kind of the new skill that people need to adopt. It's like knowing how to Google and what the right keywords are in order for it to spit out the right results. Now you have to refine your skills there and be able to provide really precise instructions. And it's interesting how you structured the prompt here with just one short instruction on top, and then just like a reference, the generic description of what the structure looks like, and then also some examples for it to already understand and have some more context on what it should deliver.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point. This, like, I guess, new and upcoming field of how do you correctly engineer your prompt? It's like becoming pretty popular, and there's even some like tooling that's being built around like how do you get the exact prompt you want. Just a brief detour. Promptable actually started off as a tool that you described. How do you like engineer your specific prompt? And this is what I actually used to build the prompt that goes into GPT-Seed. So yeah, so over here you can basically like write your prompt into here, specify the variables that go into it, and you can actually like evaluate it. So you can like run these different fields, and this is just like a nice UI to like easily get the to try out different variables and see if your prompt works, basically.
That's super cool. Thank you so much for giving us this demo, Justin, and also for like showing us a little bit how this tool works under the hood. I'm curious, what are the plans for GPT-Seed? Is it an open source project already? Is there a repo like you can share? Like, what's your plan with this project?
Yeah, so the current plan is to work on it a little bit more until or after the Promptable.js library releases. So we have like a stable version of it to build with, and then release it for free, like open source, possibly as like an NPM package or something like that, where the user can just use their own OpenAI API key.
Super cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to see your tweets about it, and we'll be sure to retweet it like once it gets out. All right. Is there anything that you want to share with the audience before we let you go, Justin?
Yeah, so pretty much if you're looking for any updates on this, follow Promptable AI, I believe, on Twitter. Yep, Promptable AI. That's where we'll be posting more updates on Promptable.js and GPT-Seed.
Awesome. Cool, Justin. Then thank you so much for joining us today. And yeah, see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for having me on. All right, bye-bye.
What a cool project.
Indeed. I have to make a confession, though. It's that I know very little about AI. So I've used ChatGPT about twice or thrice.
Yeah. Okay, like fair enough, because that would have been my next question, whether you already used ChatGPT. Well, like on my side, Alex, I can also confess I haven't used it at all. I also just kind of lacked the curiosity, but I have a lot of friends who are using it for very different purposes, and especially also non-technical friends that are using it for their kind of workflows, especially in terms of copywriting. It's supposed to be really, really good when it's about like writing copy for a marketing page or something like this that's like fairly trivial and maybe not the complexity of a developer tool. So it's very interesting to see how this entire space evolves, and of course also to see eventually what it's going to do to the software engineering space.
Yeah, and also a random side note is that I think Microsoft earlier this week released a version of Microsoft Edge and Bing that uses AI as well to kind of improve the search experience. I haven't tried it out, so I can't really speak about it, but that's just a random side note. Yeah.
AI is taking over, Alex.
Yeah.
Like not too long, we will be replaced here by avatars, and we will let the avatars stream for us.
I mean, it might be possible given that we have deepfake. We just need to create a good enough prompt for it to talk about the live stream.
Properly instructed beforehand. That's right.
Exactly.
All right. We have one more guest on the show today. I'll play the transition, and then we will talk to Nils from Sidebase. Hello, Nils. Was that only for me that the audio was bad? Alex, did you have a good audio?
I do. The audio is also distorted on my end, and I'm not sure why. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a bit distorted. We had some audio issues also in our testing before, but there the issues were that it was just that the volume was too low, and now the audio actually is a bit distorted. Now you're muted, or like not muted, but not audible.
Is it better now?
Yes, it's better
Perfect.
now.
All right. Now I'm just over my headphones. So
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
Who needs this fancy microphone anyway?
Yeah, but it's so weird. I mean, in our test before, when we had the Zoom call, everything worked. I heard you really well, and then something in StreamYard must confuse your mic there. But
yeah.
Okay, we can hear you. All is good.
Perfect. That's great.
Did you play with AI and Chat GPT already, Nils?
Yes, actually, I did a little. I mean, I'm gonna talk a bit about it later, right? But we have a software agency, and so that's at the moment, of course, the hype is really, really big. So that's something that we also talk to a lot of people about. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, cool. We brought you on today to talk about Sidebase, which is a full stack development framework based on Vue and Nuxt.js. And it uses Prisma as its default way to interact with a database. So we are always curious to talk to people who use Prisma frequently in their projects, or who even maintain kind of these open source projects, community projects that make use of Prisma in any cool way. So that's why we brought you on today, and we'll want to talk about this a little bit more later. But before we do so, maybe just also introduce yourself really quickly and give us a little bit of background of who you are.
Yeah, sure, of course. So I'm Nils. I'm also based in Germany. I'm from the beautiful city of Cologne, here in Berlin. So that's only like 2 or 3 hours away, I would say. Yeah, I'm the founder of a software agency. We are like about 25 people, I would say. We do process automation for bigger companies like maybe Ubisoft or the city of Cologne or something like that. So this is like the main business thing, I would say. And then at the beginning of last year, we also started to spin out of this Sidebase, which is this open source framework, as you called it, which was very nice. I think that's a very big word. I would rather say it's something like the Create T3 thing that also was just mentioned. But yeah, so this is Sidebase basically then that we spun out of this. Yeah.
Okay, so it's like, if it's not a framework, it's rather that you kind of assembled different kinds of tools together and you put it into one stack. Maybe stack is maybe the better word, as the T3 stack. But it does have a CLI, right?
Yes, it does have a CLI that you can use to kind of interact with it. And I would also say that maybe stack is the better word. So you basically just compose a bunch of stuff. Internally, we called it scaffold before because it kind of props up the project and you use it to initialize. And then once you have that, you basically get going on that basis. Yeah.
That's so interesting, and that also actually seems to be a fairly typical path that some software engineer, like kind of software agencies take on kind of repeating projects where they always first have to start out kind of with a clean slate, and after a while they kind of realize, okay, we can now put something together for us that allows us just to get off the ground quicker. So you with SideStream and Sidebase are actually not the first one that I'm aware of that has been doing this. For example, the folks from Keystone. So like Keystone.js is also a backend framework. They call themselves, I think, a headless CMS. However you want to qualify them, but they also essentially give you the option to quickly build a backend. And they're also using Prisma, and they are also based out of an agency initially. I think it's called ThinkMill or something. They're based in Australia.
That's correct.
So it seems to be a thing that like software agencies who just have the repeating work of always doing the same, setting up the same CRUD apps, at some point want to do this a little bit more efficiently.
Yeah, definitely. That's a super interesting point. I think at some point when you're just, we are always rebuilding a lot of stuff under the hood, or maybe we're not even rebuilding it. We're already like making the work of copying it and so on. Then at some point you think, okay, can we just package it internally? Then once you have it packaged, you may think, okay, like how big of a blow would it now be if we just publish it and maybe get other people involved, get like the power of the open source community behind it, as like Prisma, for example, does as well, right? So that's kind of, I think, a very natural path for a lot of companies that kind of write repeating code. Yeah.
Right. Have you been involved with any open source projects before you started Sidebase already, or was that your first exposure to open source?
Not in that big of a way, I would say. So I did some contributions here and there. Like my language before JavaScript and TypeScript was Python, so this was more like up my alley. And then sometimes we were using stuff in projects, and maybe there was a feature that we were missing or something like this. And then I would go out and contribute it to the library. Then we just bump the library and have the feature as well. That's very nice. And this is kind of the level of contribution that I maybe did in, I don't know, 2018, 2019, something like that. And then with Sidebase, of course, that's like a totally different level. Yeah.
Makes sense. Very cool. So let's talk a little bit about Sidebase itself, the project, and maybe like however you want to introduce it. You've talked a little bit about how you came up with the idea already. I don't know if you want to add anything there, but yeah, I'm curious a little bit about the history, when you started it, and how it evolved.
Yeah, sure. So I think at the end of like 2 years ago, so 2021, we switched our internal stack from Python backends to Python backends and JavaScript frontends to basically be full stack JavaScript and TypeScript. Kind of saw all the big advantages and the magic on the other side of the rainbow there, when you don't have to write like separate code for the backend and the frontend. And when we did this, we also transitioned to Nuxt 3 immediately. Before that, we had been using Nuxt 2. And of course, at the beginning of last year, and even to this day, Nuxt 3 is still a bit in its infancy. So like the whole ecosystem and so on is still catching up. There are some gaps that need to be filled and so on. And so when we did the switch, we were actually very early, and we kind of had to polyfill and fix a bunch of stuff for it to actually work. And then, so middle of last year, we thought, okay, like the community is struggling so much. Internally, we already have the solution to many of these problems. Let's kind of open source it, see maybe there's some more gaps that can be filled this way, and get started with that. And this is when we released the first, so before that it was called our scaffold internally, and then we kind of named it Sidebase and just spun it out. And this was kind of how we got started, with Sidebase. And from there on, it has...
Yeah, so the reason why you initially built this was actually to make, or to fill some of the holes that you saw in Nuxt. It didn't do everything that you needed it for, like your project. So you used Nuxt and you backfilled like some of the missing functionality, and that became Sidebase.
Yes.
Does that also mean that once all this functionality is implemented in Nuxt, that Sidebase would become obsolete, or are there more things to Sidebase, especially now after you've worked on it for a while, that still kind of justify its existence?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think so. Some stuff is becoming obsolete. Just like 4 hours ago or something like this, Nuxt 3.2 was actually released, which contains native session support, which is awesome because like that's working really well and it looks great. And this means that actually one of the first modules that we released, which is like happened 6 months ago, so you can see how much earlier we basically were than what they're working on right now, will probably be deprecated soon. And that's totally fine for us, because we always knew for this particular module that it would not be something that we kind of permanently maintain, but something that kind of props up the community until that's like there natively. But there is also a bunch of stuff. For example, we've written an authentication module. We've done this like setting up the modules in the correct way, adding files, initializing Prisma kind of stuff. There's always going to be some functionality that the next team is going to want to keep out of their core, because that's just not inside the scope of the framework and their goal. And so that's kind of where we are starting now. And I think this kind of project setup part and so on, that will probably always stay out of reach, because it just doesn't make sense to like blow it up that much, right? To just integrate Prisma into the core of Next, that would probably not be the right decision for the framework team.
Yeah, agreed. That's very interesting. Okay, how about so you started out, you said last summer with like Sidebase, or that's when you open source it. So when you did that, what did the database solution look like in Sidebase? What was your path with the data layer? How did it evolve?
Yes, I know why you're asking this question, because initially, of course, so initially when we started experimenting, we actually had one project with a customer and we did it with Prisma, but the experience for our development team on that project was not very good. We can also go into the details about this if you want to. But so afterwards, we were looking for something that's closer to what we knew from Python, which was SQL Alchemy. This is like the Python equivalent. And there we found TypeORM, which made a lot of promises and looked to resolve also some of the problems we had with Prisma. So we switched to that. There is actually one project still ongoing with that, and like it's a pretty big project, pretty decent size, but we also made a lot of learnings now. And so, okay, that's also not the light at the end of the tunnel. And so now we kind of switched back to Prisma. There's like, I can also go into detail about we did that.
Let's talk a little bit about the friction points that your engineering team has encountered there, because it's also always very, very interesting for us to learn about this from this internal perspective of building a tool. Like we're always most of the times just exposed to the happy paths, right? So it's very instructive for us and very insightful to be able to talk to our users and have these conversations. And we not only do this with you here on stream, but this is what we as developer advocates do on a regular basis anyways, and also some of our product people. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about the like main friction points that your team has encountered then, and kind of like for us as new insights that we can take away.
Sure, let's do it. I'm very open. I can just start if you want to, unless you have a specific question. All right. So I think one of the biggest problems for us back then was that you couldn't interact with Prisma programmatically on the level that we wanted to. So kind of trigger a migration from the CLI, or maybe from your code. And sorry, you can do it from the CLI, of course, but you can't do it from the code. Setting up the database, tearing down the database, and so on. That was something we were really missing. Because, for example, when we write tests, we want to make sure that we always kind of build up the database, run our test, and then tear it down, and then go over and over again, right? And so this was something that was like deceptively easy in Python. And so we kind of switched, and we wanted to have the same thing. And then we saw Prisma, where it was like, okay, I can write something that spawns a process to execute the Prisma CLI, and then I can do it this way. But like that feels really, really weird when you kind of do it in the test. So this was one big reason.
It's an annoying workaround when you have to call a CLI command from your code by spawning a new process, as you said. When there could just be some kind of SDK or some kind of way to directly interface with what the CLI is also using under the hood. I think we have an open issue for that. That's along the lines of publishing a Prisma SDK where people have access to the underlying functions of the migration engine directly, and we give them a JavaScript-based interface to call the relevant CLI commands. That's a very valid point.
Yeah. And so I think this workaround works, and now we kind of made our peace with it because we kind of also went back to it. But that would definitely be a good feature to see at some point.
We will take this to our product team.
I know. And I know that there's a lot of priorities and requests and so on. That's just something that we kind of experienced within our kind of project.
It's the reality of building products, right? You always have constrained resources. You always have to somehow prioritize, and not everybody will always be happy about your decision. So you also have to have a bit of a thick skin sometimes to not let that get too close to you. Maybe let's talk about then your experience with TypeORM next, and maybe some of the issues that you ran into there that made you migrate back to Prisma.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, usually when we do bigger technical decisions, we kind of have research issues, and we like collect requirements, and we compare the different solutions that there are according to these requirements. And so TypeORM was kind of next on the list. What we initially liked about it was that it was very similar to how we did things in Python, because you have this kind of class-based approach to define your data schema. You have decorators, which when you come from Python, in Python they are just amazing. In TypeScript they are, which is also like some engineering learning experience that we had to do over time. And I mean, now we have like much deeper into it, and we know that at some point the real decorators will be stabilized soon. So that's something that we are looking forward to. But yeah, when we actually used it, it also had some problems. And I think in the end, these were like more serious to us than what we saw with Prisma. And there's also other stuff that happened with Prisma, which made it much better, which we can also talk about. The thing with TypeORM is that the usage is really awkward, and it's not really modern JavaScript when you kind of interact with it. So you have these classes, you have these decorators that, like in the beginning, VS Code didn't even support. So every time you save, they like weirdly indent the @decorator things because they don't know what it is, or they like squiggle it and say, hey, please like format it differently. But you're like, no, this is like the perfect way to do it.
So also just basically annoyances in terms of developer experience, right? Things just don't flow properly. You have to think about issues that are really not relevant to your goal, right? Like when you have to think about indentation of decorators, it's the least productive thing you could think about when you're trying to build something for a client or a customer.
100%. Yeah, 100%. It's super. And it gets to the point where it becomes a meme, and it's like, yeah, okay, the linting is broken again because like the decorators, yeah, okay, I mean, I will fix it. So yeah, that's something that definitely drove us away. Another thing with TypeORM is that the docs are really bad. I don't know if you know about this situation, but like there's official docs, but they're like super weirdly hosted and not easy to search. And then people even started to host like separate versions of these docs because they want to maybe add the search or something like this. And based on this, if you start to Google around, you will actually find like results and click on it, think that it's TypeORM documentation, but it's actually a pet project of somebody who like tried to make it nicer and so on. So that's, yeah, I don't want to be like mean to these people, because that's like real effort and dedication that goes into it, and I really appreciate it. But that just makes it really hard as like driven engineering team to resolve issues correctly, right?
Yeah, for sure. Interesting. So then you went back, or then you reevaluated your choice of TypeORM. How did that evaluation take place, just like in general? Again, like a research issue with the alternatives which you put up, or how did that go about?
Yeah, I think the trigger so it kind of sneaked back in via Sidebase, because at that point Sidebase was already there and we had published it also with the TypeORM baseline. But like from day one, there was public opinion and people that were like, hey, this is super awesome, but why are you using TypeORM and not Prisma and so on? We, for example, also got, I think I was in contact with Alex back then also somewhere, because you guys are of course super helpful and around when something like this pops up. So there was the public opinion, definitely, that kind of was the Kickstarter maybe. Also, we have like a Discord community for Sidebase, and there was one person that I had like, I don't know, hour-long conversations with, where we were like going through the individual pain points, and he was helping me to resolve them, or maybe not resolve them, but say, okay, that's true, but have you considered this and so on. So public opinion was definitely one thing. Another thing was, of course, that then TypeORM in practice really sucked. Also, it was like good in theory. And I think the third thing is that over time, some of the problems that we initially had were actually addressed by you or by your team. And we saw that there was just progress on these issues. Like, for example, just recently, I think you added views. And this is something that for like the large scale production applications that we sometimes build, it's like super important. And it's very good to see that at the beginning of last year, we had this pain and we couldn't use it. And then over time, you resolved it and added it. So we kind of see the progress there. Whereas with TypeORM, it's like a really, really slow development process, which I think also isn't really directed anywhere. So that was, I think, the third reason why we switched back to Prisma.
Yeah, we hear this quite a bit, that the fact that Prisma is under active development and that we regularly put out these features that have been, I mean, yes, views are a very fundamental features. You would just expect it from like a database library and an ORM. And on the one hand, you can ask, why did it take you so long to build this? But yeah, we talked about it before, right? This prioritization of the right features. You just can't do like everything at all times. We like for a while prioritized like supporting MongoDB for a while, so that was a big effort internally. Now we're back at the stage where we can really make sure that we cover all the functionality that people really want to use in their database and giving them a Prisma native interface to that. So that's good to hear that like you also saw this and that actually also contributed to you switching back to Prisma. All right, we have talked a lot about Sidebase now. I think everybody's dying to see it. So would you be open to sharing your screen and like maybe give us a little bit of a demo to see what it looks like?
Sure, let's see. I know that live demos are always great, so I love to hold them instead of a pre-recorded video or something like this. So let's see.
Thank the demo gods.
That's very good. Yeah, so you should be able to see my code editor now. And yes. I will adhere to Alex's advice and make it as big as I think. And then one more. Okay, that's probably a bit too big. I think you can read it. Yeah, it looks all right, right? So this is an empty directory. There's nothing in it, as you can see. And this is just for the demo, of course. And basically, of course, the goal of this of Sidebase is for you to be able to quickly scaffold and get started on development and just be productive. And so let's see what this looks like. You can basically use this npm create command. And this is the same mechanic that, for example, that, for example, you have with the T3 stack. They basically use the same mechanism. And this is also where we learned that this even exists. I think the npm create keyword is not something that most developers frequently like use or kind of know where it comes from. But yeah, super interesting.
Of a gem, yeah.
A bit of a what? Sorry.
It's a bit of a gem, like a hidden gem sometimes.
Yeah,
for
definitely
people to discover.
Yeah, definitely. So we run this, and we have our beautiful sheep diamond saying hello to us and telling us the version that we are using, which I think is very practical for debugging. You get a link to the docs, so in case you're already stuck, you can do that. And then you decide on your project name. So there's some randomly pre-generated names. This is actually from the astro.cli. I don't know if you've used it, but that's like a really good thing to get started with Astro. Super nice experience, and that's where we got the idea from. We want to call it my Sidebase venture. Then there's like 2 stacks that you can select. So you can either go very granular, and we chose merino for this, which is a type of wool that's very granular. So this is a bit of background sheep information.
I see what you did there.
And the other one is Cheviot, which is very thick wool. And this is like the batteries included. You don't need to select a lot of stuff. You can just kind of get going with a very big setup kind of stack. And this is what you can select in that case. There is more documentation on this. Yeah, let's go with the Merino stack today. So here we already see Prisma, which is the next generation TypeORM, of course. Let's select this. We can have authentication. We can have TRPC, which I think is also a crowd favorite at the moment. Then, of course, Tailwind. And if we want to have more UI components out of the box, we can also select naive UI. So let's also select that one. Then we can already select the Git repository if we want to. Let's do it. Let's also add a like CI so that we have nice testing for our project, which is, I think, very important for stable and quick development. And it also asks us if we want to run npm install after finishing up. So let's also do this and hope that it doesn't kill my internet connection. So if I'm lost in translation, then you will know why, because I'm downloading 4 gigabytes of Node modules.
npm. Classic. Well, like I'm happy to see a fellow like a fellow Light theme user here in your code editor. That's rare these days.
It's very rare. It's very rare. I was on the dark side for so long, and then in the middle of in the middle of last year, I was just like, okay, come on, let's go back to the light side. And I actually like it. It's really good on the eyes.
Yeah, me too. I also much prefer it.
Awesome. Yeah, so let's check it out. So Diamond is done and says goodbye. Also invites to the Discord. If there's like more direct questions, we are very active there. So if you need any support, you can just reach us, or for feedback, that's also like super valuable, I think. Diamond also tells us what to do next. So let's just follow these instructions. We can do this, then we can push to the database using Prisma. If you don't select Prisma in the previous step, this would, for example, also not be shown. So it's customized to follow this behavior. And with that, since the client is already generated, we don't need the Prisma generate step, and we can just get going. And this is the important, exciting part of the live demo. Okay, so looks good. Next 3 already started. It's super quick. Now let's check it out in the browser, which I don't think you can see. So I will need to
yeah, you probably just shared the window.
Yeah, I have like a super big monitor, so it's nice, but that's a bit of a pain sometimes.
Where was it?
Yeah, let's see. Is it this one? Yes. So here's my empty browser, of course, using Firefox. And yeah, so this is where you are. You get this very nice page. Let me also zoom in a bit so you can read it. Yeah, so here you see the different components that are installed and that are like already working for you, and you can just kind of get going. There's also like more detailed example pages, but those are a bit more ugly. I will still show them right now. So this is, for example, the Prisma example page, which is very minimalistic, as you can see. But this is like, in the code editor, you also have the file, of course, and you can see how we already fetched the data from an API, and the API, of course, uses a Prisma client. And so you kind of already have this end-to-end flow set up, and you could already expand it to have your own logic.
That's really nice. I really like this when the initial setup already includes like some of the snippets that you will be needing throughout your development, and you can use this in order to anticipate what you then need to do, right? And just showing one Prisma client query already tells people, that's how I interact with the database. Maybe they use the auto completion to explore more of the queries. So that's really cool. I like it.
Yeah, definitely. That's also what I think, because like if you have to figure out, okay, how do I do this import again? Oh, like this is red, it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? And so on. It's super nice to have like one building block or one example for each thing you might want to do. And then you can either throw them all away or use what you kind of want to do. Yeah.
Do you have such a template also for the authentication part of it, or is there, like, you had selected that, but is that just a dependency in the project, or is there also already some kind of implementation for the authentication here?
Yeah, very good question. There's also a template for this. So if you look here.
Perfect.
Yeah, you can see it.
But okay,
there's some live demo problems at the moment.
Yeah, okay.
Of course.
You should not be signed in like typically, but then you would click the button and it would register a user, and then you would be logged in.
Yeah, exactly. And under the hood, it uses NextAuth, which is based on NextAuth. So if you're from the React ecosystem, that's like the biggest library there. And we basically this way provide like all the 40 OAuth providers and so on out of the box. So this was something that we brought to the Next ecosystem, I think like 4 or 5 months ago. Yeah. And this is also something that, like for example, this is one example of a module which won't be replaced, because that's just not in the like target scope of the Next team. They may gonna like build a smaller authentication module, but like that's a good example of what would remain as a difference.
Makes sense. All right, Nils, thank you so much for this overview. That was super insightful. Sidebase looks amazing. Good luck with continuing it as a project. Anything
Thanks.
that you want to share with our audience before we let you go?
Yeah, sure. So join and use Sidebase if you want to. Hop onto our Discord and give us feedback. And yeah, thanks to you two for having me on the show. It was very nice.
Of course. Thanks for joining. Bye-bye.
Sure. Bye.
Oh, race conditions. Okay.
I told you beforehand I didn't want to touch anything, but we have to work on this.
No problem.
All right. To wrap up today's stream, we just quickly wanted to do a little bit of a review of Accelerate again, of Prisma Accelerate, a new tool that we've launched in the commercial Prisma data platform. And for doing that, I'm going ahead and will share my screen again. Just a second.
I'll add it to the stream.
Yes, and I will open the Accelerate page and also the Accelerate documentation that I want to show everybody. But first, let's quickly reiterate what Accelerate actually is. You can see my screen, right?
Yes, but I
Okay.
could bump it up.
I'll bump it up again, just make sure. Okay, the most important thing to understand about Accelerate is that it's a global database cache that's available in 280 locations, and it comes with built-in connection pooling. And if you have followed Prisma in the last couple of months, over the course of the last year or 1.5 years, you know that we have another commercial product, a feature of the Prisma data platform that's called the data proxy. And Accelerate basically uses the data proxy under the hood for connection pooling as well. So if you're using Accelerate, you will also be using the data proxy. And I'm not 100% sure how the products are going to evolve, but I would assume that the data proxy somehow gets merged into Accelerate. It really makes your database queries a lot faster from the application where it's running when the data is being cached in that many locations. So you have the potential to have up to 1,000 times faster database queries, which I think is just mind-blowing. And here we have a little bit of a graphic that shows kind of how things work with and without Accelerate. So with Accelerate, the important part is just that you have these nodes, these caching nodes that are distributed across the globe. That's where the data from your database is going to be cached, so that if your application is running close to the users when you deployed it in several serverless regions or with edge deployments, then the latency that is needed to go from that computational node, either serverless or edge, to the cached data is very low. It comes with a connection pooling and some frequently asked questions that you can learn about when you go on the website here. And then also there is the Accelerate documentation that you can access via this link. Maybe you can drop it in the chat, Alex. Sure. Where we talk a little bit more about the details of Accelerate. So we dive into the cache strategy. We explain the parameters that you can set for caching, the time to live, and the stale while revalidating periods. Both are provided in seconds, and you can provide these as arguments to Prisma Client with this new argument that's being added to read queries of Prisma Client. So find unique or throw, find first, and so on. These are all the read queries that you can use in Prisma Client, and where you can apply the caching strategy that works best for your use case. It's not supported for read operations and also not for raw SQL queries.
I think, sorry for interrupting. I think it's the other way around, where it doesn't support write operations.
Sorry. Yes,
Yeah.
what did I say? Okay, yeah, it supports
Read.
read operations, but doesn't support write operations.
Right.
Yes, of
Yeah.
course. And there is a way how you can get metadata about the caching behavior. So you can call this .with accelerate info method on the result of one of your queries. It returns you this info object in addition to the actual data that you received from the query. And it gives you some additional information about the cache status, about the region, and just in general kind of information that you might need at runtime in order to assess whether the caching behavior has had its intended purpose. And then we have the section here that describes how to use Accelerate. So at the moment, it's running in a private early access program. That means that you will have to join our waitlist, and then we will send you an invitation to join the program by email. Then you can start using it. And hopefully in a couple of weeks, we can open up the program for anybody to start using and exploring Accelerate in their applications. There also is a sample repo, I think, that we have somewhere that people can try out. Yeah, here it's this open source repo that you can use as a reference once you have signed up on the waitlist and you have gotten access. Yeah, that's really everything that I wanted to show here. I'll stop sharing my screen.
What's really interesting about the Accelerate is that it's built on top of Prisma client extensions, which is another preview feature that just enables so many workflows that you can think. Well, it's as many as you can think of on top of Prisma client. Yeah.
Yes, indeed, because maybe like some of you have wondered where this cache strategy parameter in the find many query like suddenly came from, or this .with accelerate info that you can now call on the results of a Prisma client read query. And these are coming from Prisma client extensions. So unless you're actually using Prisma Accelerate and you applied the Prisma client extension to your Prisma client instance that enables it, you actually don't have access to these parameters. They will remain invisible to you unless you've explicitly registered that extension.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure we could also highlight that, it enables other example workflows like row level security that, I think a lot of folks have been asking about a lot on Twitter, especially when working with Sidebase, which, I don't know, it's pretty fun and I'm excited about it. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah. Prisma client extensions are an amazing feature.
Thanks.
All right, Alex, I think we can wrap up this stream now. Thank you so much for joining me again today. It was a pleasure hosting this with you. And I will see you in maybe the next stream, maybe the next stream after. We will see. Have a great rest of your day.
Ciao.